Two childhood friends, a Roman soldier and a Jewish prince, are reunited, but quickly fall apart in their loyalties between the empire and their home country. In fact, what happens is that the prince is then sent to the galleys for treachery against the Roman Empire, and as well as his family is imprisoned. And so he ends up surviving that before seeking revenge. And that's this basic story of course, Ben Hur, which we'll talk about this week. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hi there.
I think one of the things that we've talked about, of course, is, in Death Wish, is this idea of revenge and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I think we didn't cover quite is how there's this quote, I think it's a saying about, before seeking revenge, dig two graves. And to me, what that expression means is that, like, once you are set on this path to, kind of take somebody else's life, that kind of thing stuff, you've really committed your life to it. So in other words, you've basically already given away your life again to seek this revenge and stuff. And I think we kind of see this in Ben Hur.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely on a mission for the entire 3 hours, 40 minutes. I mean, in most cases, most revenge stories, they end pretty badly. The advantage that Ben Hur has over most people is that he's got Jesus as a co-pilot. So, he gets his other redemption from that as well.
Yeah, and that's a great way to start for the first one and stuff. To me, it's the original in the sense of, like, it's the first one made with sound with Charton Heston. And I feel like out of the different versions, that one, you really had the sense of besides the scale and stuff, that it really was, they wanted to put all this attention to the biblical story and everything. Like you had like the wise men kind of, kicking things off and stuff. You had, of course, like you said, this Christ figure who, unlike the other ones, you never really see them and, see him rather. And I felt that was a really effective way to portray him. It's kind of like, to me, like Jaws, where, like, you don't see the shark until the very end and stuff. And in fact, in, of course, Ben Hur, we don't see Christ at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely. And we've talked about this in horror movies as well. When you're trying to create this effect of something or somebody that's beyond comprehension, you don't show them. You keep them hidden from the audience to, retain that mystique. And they did that quite a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they did this all the way through this movie. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sort of Christian events all the way through Ben Hur. You have got the nativity, you've got the three wise men. You've got him being crucified. Sorry, spoiler alert, of course, if everyone. I thought most people might be familiar with Tale of Jesus, but it hits a lot of the points. And I mean, I kind of felt this was. I mean, the thing is, Jesus as a character is not really someone that you can make an action movie about. And Ben Hur is
South Park.
And this is South Park, right? But I mean, I kind of got the impression that Lew Wallace wrote this almost like, if Jesus had like a badass cousin who happened to ride chariots, he'd still be on like Jesus's side, but he'd also like, he'd fight and, he'd race chariots and all this. It's kind of like the action companion piece to Jesus' life in a way. So I can see why it was so popular. It's kind of like, it's got all the, classic Christian beats of events that happen, but just with a few more action scenes, basically.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like that where, here you have this biblical story that's so, like kind of known in the Western world. And in a way, like, that's really what, like you said, Ben Hur does, is kind of really makes it like an action-packed, movie. Like it's much more exciting than, right, we're just following, like kind of a historical story and stuff like that. And I tell you, like, we talked about the scale to a degree, but it's just, to me, like the other versions are really strong in their own, kind of, and we'll of course get to that. But I mean, just the sheer epic scale of the original, like it just, phenomenal. Like kind of, we're talking about like tens of thousands of, extras, horses out the wazoo and stuff like that. And we'll get to the chariot race discussion and everything. And, yeah, it just, you really felt like there was just no expense that was spared and stuff.
Yeah. And of course, back then, you couldn't actually, there's so much reverence to Christianity in it. You couldn't really make a movie like that now, being so sort of serious and reverent about Christianity, because it just wouldn't fly in a modern movie. So it's very much a movie of its time in that respect, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point too, where probably around that time period, we see like a few different, biblical stories, and they all have this kind of, clear intent to be very true to the Bible story and stuff. And there's not this kind of cynicism or just like kind of this kind of feeling of a compelling need to portray in a way that's made for a modern audience. Like you didn't get that sense though, that like kind of that was the case. Maybe that like that was the modern audience at that time and stuff, where they were more like about in fact, even the movie industry, they had what's kind of called code, where they had to kind of portray things for a Protestant white audience and stuff. That was in fact, like kind of just the basic premise of it, that which really drove, before you had all the movie ratings, all that kind of stuff, how the general behavior was and everything.
I think as well, this theme of like somebody rising up against an empire is a very sort of appealing American perhaps sort of theme, because you had the English control for so many years, and that's kind of very embedded into the American kind of psyche, I think, is this idea that we fought for our independence, and that's exactly what Judah is doing in the movie.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's a great point too, where it's also the sense of the underdog and like kind of almost like kind of American values in the biblical story and stuff. And whereas, in fact, I've also, the way I understand it, that there was a lot of resistance to putting anything like kind of, Jewish, quote unquote, into in a movie, again, made for a, white Protestant, audience and stuff. But it's almost in a way that here's a story about the Jewish people. In fact, that's a great point, though, that like specifically wanted, kind of this kind of non-Jewish looking actor and stuff like that for Ben Hur.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the other criticism you can throw at it, is like Charton Heston's probably about the least Jewish looking person I can imagine, but well, maybe not imagine, but and also you've got, I think it's like a Welsh actor in brown face playing an Arab well, which looks a bit dodgy these days. Yeah, and I think as well, this is a post-World War II movie, so you've got, there's a lot of subtext mentions of anti-Semitism. A lot of the Romans, they refer to the Jews by number in the movie. You've got the Romans sort of saying, oh, this person's just a Jew, we can be better than them. So there's, they're drawing a lot of parallels to the Nazi Empire, I think, as well. And they make much more of a point of that's really nowhere near. There's not very much of that at all in the 2016 version. So you can tell that's obviously very much a theme that was, something that the film director, who I can't remember at the moment, wanted to drive home in it, which I think he does effectively, actually.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing where you really do see how that the Jewishness is kind of where, on one hand, that's the core, of course, the story and stuff like that. But the other, it's and I don't know, to be honest, like what the actual like kind of relation with the the director.
One of the clear parallels between Nazi occupation and something that's featured in this movie was the galley slaves, and this idea that you would the Romans are making them basically work to death in these ships. Now, that isn't actually historically accurate. This is something that was written into the book, which would have been before World War II, World War I. But it was very much in there to, make the Romans seem like these, slave driver, and got them to row their boats, I should say. But,
and it's interesting how you see the general kind of setup, and well, we even cover this in the remakes and stuff, where the Romans are kind of this occupation force. They are very much like kind of, you're either a part of the empire or you're going to be conquered and stuff. And that's very much kind of, we see that at this point. It's definitely, I feel like in some ways the remakes actually get a little bit deeper into that. But yeah, it's by no means do we see like kind of, the Romans as like kind of quote unquote the good guys and stuff like that. They're very much portrayed as like kind of, I guess another way to put it is Empire in like kind of, the Star Wars series, something like that, where it's like kind of, they're the baddies and stuff, and they're very much like kind of, the villains, throughout and everything.
Yeah, they're very clearly delineated that way. Yeah, I mean, one of the differences I would say between this and the 2016 version is that the attitude is that there's a sort of a hopeful resistance with Charton Heston and the way his struggle is portrayed, whereas in the 2016 version, Judah's fight is seen as kind of a hopeless one. It's kind of like, you're not really going to get rid of these people, and all you can do is beat them in the chariots, and that's all you can do. There's not really there's no sense that you could really actually get them out of Jerusalem. So
yeah, and that's another interesting aspect of all this too, is Judea and that part of the world has, certainly we're more familiar now and before like 9/11, I'd say, of how much that area just has crisis after crisis throughout its history. And we're talking like thousands of years too. We're not talking like just, maybe, like kind of in recent years we have like kind of more conflicts and all that. But this is like a long history of the Jewish people basically being oppressed, and other times like running from one part of the whole Middle East to another. And it wasn't the Romans, it was the Egyptians, which, of course is covered in, the Ten Commandments and stuff. And certainly like, yeah, we just see like kind of a long history of the people that's basically like kind of really struggling to just survive and kind of see another day and stuff like that in that part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the only other thing I wanted to mention in terms of it's not so much connected to religion, but more the Hollywood blacklist, in that I kind of felt like, Judah is he's trying not to sell out his people. Right. I can't help feeling a little closer to home. There's a little bit of Hollywood not selling out its potential communist sympathizers as well. Yeah. I wonder if there's a little bit of that mixed in, because that was kind of going on at that time as well.
Right. Yeah, that's another interesting point. Is it's a really interesting time for Hollywood in general during that time for that reason alone, where these people, like, I mean, talk about persecution and stuff, like, these actors were basically being, blacklisted by, Joseph McCarthy and company. And so that was something that like we can see, like, absolutely the parallels between, the government being kind of like, with McCarthy kind of leading the way as being like kind of the empire, and these actors trying to basically, escape, oppression and being kind of, basically having their livelihood stripped away, and like, being kind of just really having no defense. And we see that kind of with Judah Ben Hur, where he, there's this accident that happens, right, and stuff. And there's no court, there's no like kind of, due process or whatever. He's basically just in that moment, rested on the spot and just taken to galleys. I mean, that's it. Kind of that's due process back then, and stuff.
But did you know where that came from with Lew Wallace when he wrote the book?
No.
Apparently, because he was in the Civil War, and there was a particular battle called Battle of Shiloh, and he was, I think, commanding the troops in that battle, but he misinterpreted some orders that were sent to him, which meant he joined the battle far later than was expected. And people blamed him for the higher number of casualties. Wow. And so he was basically kind of stripped of his command. But he felt this was the accident that kind of that got him thrown out of the military or stripped of his command after that point. So that's where I think you get this idea of like the accident that makes your lead character affects him so much. So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I can only imagine though, like kind of where having something that like was in some way out of your control being like such a defining moment for so many other things that happened to you and everything, and that like this battle for him, the author, and then also here kind of for Judah Ben Hur, and then it also in a way it's interesting how not only of course it sets him off on this being kind of thrown in the galleys, and then like kind of and then what's interesting is like kind of in a way that like you said before that like Christ or kind of some divine force is kind of this guiding hand, right? Where then he just happens to basically be one of the survivors of, kind of the battle and stuff like that, saving a consul, I think it is, for a Roman consul, who then, adopts him as, like kind of his slave initially, but then as his, I want to say did he actually adopt him as a son? Like in the later version,
yeah, he does,
do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they didn't do it in the later one, but in the 59 one, yeah, he actually legally makes him his son.
That, of course, makes him a Roman citizen, which is, of course, like, going from becoming a Jew to, Roman citizens. That's kind of basically like going, from the coach to premium, first class and stuff.
Absolutely. And that was a real trick. I mean, they obviously had to make quite a lot of narrative changes for the 2016 version. But I felt like by leaving that part out, you kind of dissipate a lot of the tension, because what's so interesting about him coming back at the end is that he's on the same footing as Massela. Mm-hmm. So he's a Roman citizen,
right,
as is Massela, and it's not like he can just go and arrest him and throw him in jail immediately. Right. It's and that adds this kind of real sort of play of the sort of the brotherly egos off each other, which is really interesting.
Yeah, it definitely felt like he sprung himself on Massela. Not only did he kind of reappear and stuff like that, but he was like saying, like, yeah, that's right, I'm back, and you can't do anything to me. Kind of that's what it felt like he was saying.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, no, and it added a lot of extra tension to that scene. So it was good. The other thing I wanted to mention was this idea of like a trivial act or an accident starting a trail of revenge, because that's actually seen in quite a lot of revenge movies. Like I'm thinking Oldboy. Oldboy is kind of like an accident that pretty much kind of starts the whole revenge cycle. And you could almost say that in Death Wish, it just happened to be his house that got sort of, broken into. So, yeah, I think there's this. There's probably a lot more movies. I'll keep an eye on that next time I watch another revenge film. But
definitely. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the 2010 the television series. I was just kind of wondering if you.
I didn't watch the 2010 series.
So basically, it felt like a kind of series that like was very much influenced by Game of Thrones. You had a lot more, sex, intrigue with like this Greek woman that like forms this kind of, you can't even call it a love triangle, because basically she sleeps with everybody except the women. She's of course ends up with Judah, but then also Massela, Massela's father, and as far as we know, maybe even like the emperor and stuff. So,
that was, that's what I felt with the 2016 version. It almost felt like a Game of Thrones reunion, because there was quite a few, like half of the main cast was from Game of Thrones as well. So
that's true.
Yeah. That or Westworld. Rodrigo Santoro, I think, is Jesus in that one. So, yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, does it follow the same kind of plot points as the original movie?
Yeah, for the most part, it was pretty true to the original and stuff. Here again, we have, like kind of the Roman, I think this time he's a captain, I'm going to say. And then he adopts, kind of Judah and stuff like that. But just adding in these other elements, like, this kind of, like she's actually pretty prominent, this Greek prostitute stuff is a pretty prominent, part of the story, because she's actually a catalyst for some different elements that like just would not have, in fact, they're not anything in the other stories and stuff, or the other versions. The other thing is that like they made a big point of like kind of having this emperor, Tiberius and stuff, played by, I forget his name, but Ben Kingsley, I want to say, from Chariots of Fire. Yeah. And so he's, kind of definitely, it's been a while since we've seen something with him, but he's definitely packed some star power and stuff, and kind of light things up and everything. Overall, like you see, is a lot of the production is like kind of just these people who are more established in television, that kind of because they're not any of them were really like kind of the big screen actors and everything. But at the same time, though, overall though, like they did a really, I mean, it had other than the intrigue and the sex and stuff like that, it was actually very like the production value was actually pretty high for a television series. It was not like it did not feel like kind of a made for television thing, except for one thing, which actually may be kind of the part of the whole point, right, and stuff. And certainly we saw it in the latest version. It's the chariot race. So rather than having this epic stadium and everything like that, they had a dirt track, and so it kind of lost something there.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Overall, though, like they did a really, I mean, it had other than the intrigue and the sex and stuff like that, it was actually very like the production value was actually pretty high for a television series. It was not like it did not feel like kind of a made for television thing, except for one thing, which actually may be kind of the part of the whole point, right, and stuff. And certainly we saw it in the latest version. It's the chariot race. So rather than having this epic stadium and everything like that, they had a dirt track, and so it kind of lost something there. Just not having that kind of scale, and kudos to them for like kind of still like the filming of it was still like kind of really high production value, where they captured a lot of the excitement, all that kind of stuff. But it definitely lost something not having that huge stadium.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I also wonder with the 2016 version. Is like, why would you try to remake one of the most epic scale Hollywood pictures of all time, but not make it really very epic? That was one of the things I didn't really understand. The main motivation point of a remake, that didn't really make sense with the 2016. And I think, as we were sort of talking offline earlier, one of the things that kind of draws you in with Ben Hur is it's not, the scale of it is so enormous. The sets for the chariot race are just massive. The galley and the ship battle halfway through is pretty epic, even though it's mostly obviously just in a big fish tank. But it's still done effectively, and there's so many extras, and everything just feels incredibly epic. And I believe this was like a make or break movie for MGM at the time. Kind of like they bet pretty big on this one,
right?
And I think that's partly what's so appealing about some of these older epic Hollywood movies, is that you're looking at all this physical, real stuff that got captured on film,
right?
And I think a lot of CGI based stuff these days, no matter how much money gets spent on it, it still doesn't quite capture that same feeling because it's not real.
Yeah.
And I was, something I was listening to recently where they were saying that digital mediums in particular, anything that is like digitally created, there's an unconscious part of us that, even though consciously we want to kind of buy into this, subconsciously we can't fully buy into it. We don't really trust what we're watching, no matter how good it is, because we can unconsciously detect it. And as much as when you ask, if you're a studio exec and you're asking people, does this look like a big stadium in Rome, or does this one that we actually built look like a stadium? Your conscious mind will tell you, well, yeah, that looks like a stadium, but 80% of whatever we take in when we watch things is unconscious. So unconsciously, we are rejecting a lot of this digital stuff, I think, which is kind of, that's why there's such a breath of fresh air watching these older, really sort of epic movies with their huge sets and things.
Right. Yeah, that must be it, because as we were talking about, like I said earlier, there was just something about like kind of the original Ben Hur that I just feel like just couldn't be duplicated by these remakes, and that must be it, like kind of just the sheer actual scale of things, and where, like you said, nowadays we have all these technological solutions or options and stuff. But I do feel like kind of maybe that's part of partly it, that like we know when we see something that like that there's this kind of true to life aspect of it, and you know, I mean, I feel like, you know, that we sound like kind of the kind of the old guys in the theater kind of thing and stuff, you know, like they don't make him like the, you know, that anymore and stuff, and but at the same time it just really feels so true though, you know.
Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, we've seen that with the Star Wars remakes as well. They did a lot more real set building and things like this to give them a more authentic feel. And I think there's a reason for that. Yeah. Even young people that I know, and I'm speaking very much like an older sounding person there, they said they prefer the original sort of Star Wars trilogy because it's just got a more sort of analog, natural kind of authentic feel to it.
Right.
So, but that's just my hearsay.
I thought that the well, certainly like kind of in the 2016 version, here we have a actual Jewish looking Ben Hur, like kind of, you know, so we're kind of, and then you know, the for the Arab you know, sheik and stuff like that, we have Morgan Freeman, so no longer a blackface and stuff like that, but here's a, you know, outstanding actor, like kind of basically you know, in a role that probably like for him was like, you know, just like another, you know, kind of walk in the park, I guess, and stuff like that. But at the same time though, he definitely brings this gravitas that like then kind of just, when he showed up, I was like kind of just really like kind of caught off guard, and it was kind of like, whoa, like kind of, I felt like then the value of the remake kind of really went up there like that.
Yeah, I was kind of like, oh, somebody famous finally. Yeah, well, I mean, Jack Houston, most of the cast were English, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, Jack Houston's English. And he's not from anywhere particularly exotic in England, from what I recall. But yeah, I mean, the thing that got me with the remake was the shaky cam. There was so much shaky camera work all the way through. It felt kind of like, and it had a kind of a soap opera-y kind of feel to it.
Right.
There was lots of close-ups of faces, not too many kind of wide-angle shots, which gave it a very kind of TV-ish feel, I felt.
That's true.
Yeah, and lots of recognizable faces from TV, from English actors from TV.
I felt like that one though, it did make me more sympathetic to Massela, where you saw like kind of just more of the childhood, and you saw more of the relation between the two of them. And I mean, it just definitely seemed like kind of that he was a little bit more fleshed out than, you know, I mean, all things considered, like that's kind of one of the things that really to me stood out about it. And like, you know, major spoiler alert. In this one, like I did not expect them to kind of have him survive, and so that was like totally caught me off guard also, and it was an interesting twist, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely prefer the sort of poetic tragedy of them having this sort of battle that lasts beyond the race, but yeah, you know, them just becoming buddies at the end was it just kind of left me a little bit sort of.
I mean, it definitely takes away from the power of Judah kind of really seeing the price of, you know, revenge and stuff like that. That's to me part of the point. Like I feel is that like if he had like kind of, you know, seen his actual friend like dying and stuff like that in his arms, you know, he doesn't really pay any price for like finally getting the revenge.
Well, that's the point. I mean, in the original, I felt that was the point of why he goes and sort of ends up sort of seeking Christ, because he's bent on this revenge. Then he's going to go to Rome and kind of cause more chaos until he talks to Balthazar, who says, you know, come on, try and find another way to do it.
Right.
So he's already kind of gone through this sort of tragedy, and you know, Christ is his answer out of that. Whereas in this one, Christ is a bit of an accessory. Really. He's got his friend back. Everyone's like happy, and you know, all Christ needs to do is do a bit of magic on the leprosy, and you know, we're good to go. And I kind of, that was the other thing. I just felt everyone was just way too pretty and way too clean to be, you know, actually living in that time period. It was, I mean, you can kind of forgive the naivety in a movie in the 50s, but in 2016, when we have sort of like ultra realistic movies,
right.
everyone is just ludicrously clean, and there's remarkably, Jesus just looks like a male model. It's kind of, I don't know.
That was a really interesting choice for like kind of Jesus though, like where, like I said, he just definitely in the moments that you saw him, it was kind of like really, I don't know about jarring, but like kind of just definitely like kind of he stands out, like you said, where it's kind of like a little bit too, and again, like as we've talked about with the original, that it's probably much more effective to just not show him. Like I guess that's interesting how none of the others chose to do that or to use that same. I don't know, maybe they would have felt like they were copying like kind of the original that way and stuff. But to me, like that works. Like, why change that? Like, out of all different things.
Yeah. So one thing, of course, they did change that was kind of interesting was the chariot race, which whilst it had a kind of level of authenticity, I felt like this was sort of hyped up to the maximum, this chariot race and the chariot. I mean, compared to the rest of the movie, it obviously was like the main point, but there were horses flying everywhere. There was like, it seemed like there was just like horse-mageddon going on. There was like, horses being trampled over other horses flying through, running through the audience and kicking people.
Right.
Horses with missing limbs. It was just, pure carnage.
Yeah, they definitely did spare an expense on that sequence.
And I mean, obviously, we're rife in spoiler alert territory here, but when he's falling off and he's doing the Indiana Jones, and it was kind of like, I mean, there was a bit where Morgan Freeman's looking at, and he's there going, "Oh, there's no way he can get back," and he's not alone. Like, I think everyone in the audience is there thinking, "Yeah, well, clearly you're not going to win this race at this point. It's just not possible." Even with Jesus as your co-pilot, it's just not going to happen if you're in that situation. So,
and of course, like, couldn't do it where he just crossed the finish line, right? Where he had to like basically tumble into this epic. I don't know. I felt like it was a Ridley Scott, kind of climatic finish and stuff.
It was like, I almost expected it to be like the Matrix and him to be sort of like dodging horses in slow motion as they flew towards him or something. It was so.
They definitely went for the maximum dramatic action effect, I guess.
Yeah.
Other character though is Pontius Pilate, where I felt like in the other versions you didn't really have him having nearly the same role and stuff like that. But here, he was very prominent, like kind of in this one, where you kind of saw him much more like kind of FaceTime, and he definitely. But then what's interesting though is that like despite that, then we don't really see him like kind of doing the ceremonious, like kind of washing his hands clean of kind of convicting Christ and everything. So that's kind of an interesting kind of choice that they made as well. Like where on the one hand, you saw much more of him, but the other, like, one of the key historic moments of with Pontius Pilate is actually like excluded.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was an interesting choice because they kind of offloaded some of the responsibility of Massela's character to Pontius Pilate in that he has to do something in order to sort of make sure he doesn't massacre the rest of the people, which was kind of an interesting choice. But then by the same token, it takes away some of the evil. What was quite good about Massela in the 1959 one was that he does sort of make quite a lot of evil choices, really. Pontius Pilate is more like the distant statesman sort of overseeing things, whereas he's much more of a typical bad guy in the 2016 version.
Yeah, definitely.
And what Pontius Pilate is what I'm saying,
Yeah. I think though overall, like one of the things we always kind of get into is that like why do the remakes and stuff, right? Where I feel like the two other versions, the TV television series and of course the 2016 latest one, in a way, if it does kind of introduce younger generations to this story and kind of get them to ideally to want to at least check out the original, that to me would kind of be one purpose that like maybe the filmmakers or producers had no intention of actually that being the effect, but I feel like that if in fact they do it, even if it's not consciously, then that does kind of, in my mind, like kind of redeem them to a degree and stuff.
I suppose so, yeah. But I think I'm going to have to be much more cynical.
Okay.
And say that the studio execs go, people like Game of Thrones.
Right.
Let's try and do something like that as a remake. Oh yeah, let's do Ben Hur. That was a big hit. But then, I mean, when we talk about remakes, though, I mean, I always feel like the unofficial remake of Ben Hur is Gladiator, because there's a lot of very, very similar sort of themes in there. And of course, what I realized was that Exodus is kind of, it's a remake of the Ten Commandments, more or less. But I also, it seems like Ridley Scott's more recent movies, it's almost like he disappeared for a while, and now he's just set on making remakes of all of his older movies to some degree, or making remakes in general, because of all the Alien and kind of Exodus. It's kind of similar territory to Gladiator again. So yeah, it's something I noticed. But yeah, I kind of feel like Gladiator is like the most credible modern remake, and again has a lot of the same kind of epic scale, classic tragic kind of revenge plot in it. So that's the worthy successor, I would say.
And earlier we were talking about how there's a funny kind of Disney connection where, for me, like, it's a clear Fox and Hound story between Massela and Ben Hur and stuff. And, like that's definitely like kind of the strongest one for me. You kind of were, kind of had some other ideas as well.
No, it was just Fox and Hound. That's about the other movie. We'll be coming shortly.
So yeah, that's definitely will be coming up in a little bit. Any other kind of other thoughts for Ben Hur? I think we kind of covered everything, and I can't think of anything else that meant to say. So we're gonna actually, this is a kind of more or less doubleheader for Dan and I. So we're gonna be basically taking a short break, and we'll be back talking about La Femme Nikita and the remakes for that. So stay tuned, and we'll catch you on the next slide.